Hello, it's me again, looking absolutely ridiculous, just to prove to you and to myself that it's absolutely doesn't matter how you look, it just matters what you say, so don't prove me wrong. Um, I'm getting ready, obviously, and I really enjoy listening to podcasts or like watching documentaries or TED Talks on YouTube lately while doing that. So I thought maybe you'd enjoy that too. So I cropped together three of my favorite podcasts about fashion I watched lately. And I hope you like it because, I think they're saying exactly what I want to say. And, for me, it's really important just to get the message across with the information you need. And maybe they can say it quicker and, in a more understandable way than I can to this point. So let's leave it to the professionals. I hope you enjoy it, and I'll see you at the end of the video.
So I'd like to start today with a couple of questions for you. And first off, with a request. I'd like for you to take a look at the clothes and maybe the shoes that you're wearing right now, or at least think about them for a second. Do you know who made these clothes? Do you know what that person was paid? Do you know what country they were made in? If you're anything like me, the answer to that question is likely no. And this is the reality of the fashion industry today, an industry that has been completely defined by a lack of connection between the original producer of our goods and us as the end consumer. But it wasn't always this way. In fact, 100 years ago, you knew the name of the shoemaker in town or the tailor or seamstress. You probably knew him quite well. And as late as the 1960s, 95% of our clothes were made right here in the United States. Today, that figure is less than 3%. And as the distance from the production location to the purchase location of our products has grown, what has decreased is the amount of accountability and transparency in our supply chains. As you might imagine, this has had disastrous implications for people, the planet, and even us as the end consumer. What I'm curious to know is, does it have to be this way? In order to dig into these issues and understand a bit further, the first thing we have to do is understand what exactly has happened. And over the past several decades, as the world has continued to globalize, trade barriers have softened, which has enabled major brands to jump from one country to the next in pursuit of cheaper and cheaper materials and cheaper labor. The result, as this chart depicts on the top line, this is a consumer price index chart, the price for all consumer goods combined has grown by 70% since the mid-1990s. Yet the price of our clothing, with the acceleration of fast fashion being introduced in the early 90s, has actually decreased by 6%. And for any of you that have ever walked into one of these big box retailers with bright lights and booming music and seeing these obnoxious price tags, $15 for a pair of pants, $25 for a sweater, we've felt this change. And for the industry, cheaper, faster, higher volume has meant great success, as today the fashion industry is a $3 trillion industry reaching its most profitable moment in history. Yet as my good friend Andrew Morgan asks in his film, The True Cost, who is bearing the brunt of the success of this industry? Well, that is the people making our products, the planet that we live in, and ultimately us as the end consumer. When it comes to you and me, the concept of fast fashion and these cheap prices make us believe that we're actually saving money, that it's good for our wallets. But actually all that's happening is that we're buying more. Since the early 1990s, average consumption has increased by 500%. And what's interesting about this is that while our closets may have gotten a little bit bigger since the early 90s, I don't think that they're physically 5 or 6 times the square footage that they once were, are they? And I'd like to suggest that that is because the value of the products that we're buying, the quality of the products we're buying has gone right down with the cost. And this is one of the ways that fast fashion has fooled us, again, into believing that we're saving money when in reality all we're doing is buying more of a lower quality product. But much more importantly, fast fashion today is destroying people and the planet. And the fact is, we've been left completely unaware, yet we are half of this equation as consumers. When it comes to the planet, what's going on breaks down into where our products are made, how they're made, and where they ultimately end up. Regarding where they're made, while in the US, we've established much more sustainable forms of energy, the vast majority of our products are made in the developing world, in countries that are still largely dependent on the dirtiest of all fossil fuels, coal. Additionally, as depicted here by Zara's supply chain, the largest fashion retailer in the world, oftentimes our products are cut in one location, assembled in another, and have to cross multiple oceans before they end up in our hands. It comes to no surprise then that it's been estimated that the fashion industry is responsible by itself for 10% of the world's carbon footprint. Next up, how our products are made. In order to get the textures and the colors that we love in our clothing requires a lot of chemicals. And with very little regulation, these chemicals have gotten uglier and uglier over time. And throughout the dyeing process, a tremendous amount of fresh water is used and wasted. And oftentimes, as depicted here, these chemicals end up right back into our freshwater systems. And regarding the materials being used, these have gotten worse and worse over time. I wish I could spend all day telling you about the woes of genetically modified cotton, but I'll focus on a fiber that's man-made that doesn't get quite as much attention, and that's polyester. Polyester is now used 4 times as much as cotton. This is a man-made, energy-intensive fiber that's made up of microplastics that continue to find their way into our oceans and into our food systems. All of this adds up to the reality that the fashion industry is now the second highest polluter of fresh water. And now, another problem with polyester, as it's made up of microplastics, what that's meant is that every single piece of polyester that's ever been made is still in existence today, which is how we end up with mountains of clothing like this in landfills. And if you think back on that 500% consumption stat and the fact that our closets aren't much bigger, maybe it's not that big of a surprise then that estimates range from 50 to 85 pounds as being the amount of product that consumers throw out the door, throw away each year. And globally, 4 billion pounds of textile waste is put into landfills each year. So when we think about how our products are made, where they're made, and where they end up, the grave reality is that it's estimated that the fashion industry is the second most pollutive industry in the entire world today, behind only oil. And when it comes to people, as I mentioned earlier, this search for cheaper and cheaper labor, moving from one country to the next, has created a race to the bottom that's now full of abuse in the supply chain. It's created a natural house of cards that could literally collapse at any moment. And to give an example of this, I'd like to talk briefly about the country of Bangladesh. This is a government who has strategically kept their minimum wage at a low place so as to attract foreign investment for major apparel companies. And from a capitalistic perspective, while this has been great because they're now enjoying one of the fastest growing economies in the world, the reality is that this house of cards actually did collapse on a world stage just a few years ago. If you recall, the Rana factory collapse and the Ali Enterprises fire that killed over 2,000 people and injured thousands more, all of whom were garment workers making the clothes that we wear every day. Apart from these tragedies, a similar reality exists in the rest of the world. This is an industry where child labor and forced labor abound. And in countries like Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, and India, governments are legalizing a a $70 minimum wage per month, which means that if you break that down, that's just over $2 a day for the producer, thus systematically holding people in a cycle of extreme poverty. When we think about what's going on in our planet, what's going on with the people in this supply chain, it begs an obvious question. Could there be a better way?
How many of you can say with certainty that the clothes you're wearing right now have not been made in a sweatshop or by child labor? How many of you can say for sure that the cotton in your clothing wasn't picked by children who were trafficked onto work in cotton farms? The truth is, it's very hard to know where the material used to make our clothing comes from, or how our clothes were made. The clothing supply chain is a complex system. Perhaps this is what our clothing label should look like. Currently, only 5% of companies know where all their inputs come from. So how then can you make sure that your purchasing decisions do not contribute to child labor, human trafficking, or environmental degradation? The answer is ethical clothing, an idea that has been widely discussed over the last 10 years. Ethical clothing can be defined as an approach to the design, sourcing, and manufacturing of clothes that maximizes benefits to people and communities while minimizing the impact on the environment. Ethical clothing is even more relevant today due to the emergence of a new trend called fast fashion. Now, when I say fast food, what words come to mind? For me, I immediately think fast, cheap, and bad. It's similar with fast fashion, where fashion has changed from seasonal styles to something new nearly every week. Prices of clothing has also dropped substantially over time. You can now buy a t-shirt for as little as $7 and a pair of jeans for $15. To keep these prices low, companies outsource their clothing production to countries such as Bangladesh, where wages are very low. Currently, over 92% of clothing sold in Australia is made overseas. They don't just absorb this loss of profit resulting from lowering their prices. They try and pass it down the supply chain in an attempt to offset their loss until it reaches those who cannot pass it down anymore. They are your most vulnerable, those who have no voice. They are your garment factory workers in Bangladesh, China, Cambodia, the poor cotton farmers in India, and the child slaves working in cotton farms in Uzbekistan. There are currently 14.2 million people in forced labor and 168 million child laborers scattered across the globe. More than half the population of Australia works in forced labor, and 7 times the population of Australia in child labor. Most of these people are forced to work in the farms and factories that produce the inputs for our clothing industry. Their wages are so low that they're unable to lift themselves and their families out of poverty, and thus the cycle just continues. Apart from lowering wages, firms also try to offset their loss by asking suppliers to cut their wholesale prices. Suppliers say that because they're desperate for business, they don't really have a choice. Either cut their prices or lose out on business. Suppliers then try and offset their losses by cutting back on maintaining a safe work environment, which can lead to tragedies such as the Rana Plaza collapse in 2013, where 1,130 people died. 4 times the number of people in this building today lost their lives because of someone else's negligence. But people say, are we not doing them a favor by giving them business and stimulating their economy? Isn't working in a factory at any wage better than the other alternatives available to them? For example, working as a prostitute, or selling your child into slavery, or leaving your village, your family, and your children behind for months on end to work for wickedly low wages and unsafe working conditions. This is not a choice. This is the exploitation of vulnerability. Companies are profiting off their need to work. We need to respect these people, treat them like we would treat workers in Australia, because this would not happen in Australia. We have strong unions and fair work practices. When we speak, people listen. But you can be their voice. By being mindful about what and how often you buy, you are saying that you value the lives of these people enough to pay a little extra to ensure that they're taken care of. To ensure that a Bangladeshi garment factory worker is paid a living wage adds an extra 3 to 5% on top of the retail price that you pay in the shops. For example, that adds an extra 70 cents to $1 to your $15 pair of jeans. In addition, the amount that is paid to suppliers in garment factories accounts to only 10 to 20% of the total price that you pay as a customer in the shops. This 10 to 20% includes everything up to the point of shipping, such as sourcing of raw material, the manufacturing of the garment, and the payment of middlemen profits. So then I know that if I paid $7 for a t-shirt, the supplier was paid between 70 cents to $1.40. Common sense then tells me that his workers were not paid a whole lot.
I really worried what to wear this morning. I had no idea what to put on. And this is for men and for women. It's one of the reasons that I wear black, because people have come to expect this from me. They know that I'm going to be recognisable in a way that makes it easier for them. So clothes really do help us present ourselves to the world. After all, we need more than fig leaves. I used to wear a suit and tie to the meetings because I got so fed up with being the only woman. I really wanted to try and make a point. And I also like to wear skulls printed on my scarves because, not that I'm obsessed with death, but I really like their subversive nature. So clothes help to connect us to society. They help to connect us, whether we like it or not. We will be instantly recognisable as belonging to a certain tribe. And that is one of the reasons that they are really so significant. They also allow us to be outraged and to be alienated. I mean, think about the hoodie, or maybe more recently, think about the impacts of the bikini. So they can outrage and they can alienate, but they can also be liberating. Thinking about trousers for women, and also the fact that in a way, as society has become more relaxed about dress codes, so in a way our society has become more democratised. Clothes also help to evolve us, not just our society. After all, we are a reflection of that. I mean, it's unlikely, or perhaps, that we are wearing clothes that we had when we were a teenager or we were in our 20s, not because they don't fit us anymore, but in a way they don't evolve unless we evolve. We need to make sure that we're connected in that sort of way. But do we think about the environment? We might have planned what we were going to wear, but do we think about the environment and the impact that those clothes have had? Have we thought about who designed them, who made them, who manufactured the fibre, for example, growing the sort of flax or the hemp, or looking after the cows, or the wool for their sheep? In a way, clothes will have a massive impact on the environment. And have you thought about the garment worker? If you've paid £1 for your t-shirt, you may think, yeah, that's a great bargain. But somebody's paid that price. Somebody like Alia Akhtar, who was a garment worker from the age of 9, who was also beaten and punched and kicked because she wanted to form a union that would give her some holiday pay, increases in terms of her wage. So you may think this is a great bargain, but actually somebody else has paid for it.
There's just one last thing I'd love to say. I know there's like the internet can be such a rough place, and I will probably one day regret, presenting myself like that. But what I think is amazing about this digital age is that we can learn so much from each other, and that like in no age of time ever before, we have this different system of platform where you can learn about the things that you are interested most in. I think it's also a place where people can support each other like no place before, and support each other globally, and really just like share a message globally. But the thing is always, it's not the platform, it's the humans. And that's why I'm kind of thinking the internet for is that the internet has kind of gave us the opportunity to connect with each other and to learn from each other and to inspire and support each other. And I think that's the most beautiful thing. And I'm actually very thankful for that. I mean, and thank you for listening. But yeah.